Mhm.
We have Jess Hilarious in the hot seat. And the reason why she's in the hot seat is not for her comedy, that's for damn sure. But it was
Wow,
because she
shade.
made it was because she made a comment that only women can have babies. And so this was met with some pushback on the Breakfast Club from their guest, Lene Vanny. I think that's how you pronounce her last name.
Renee.
Is it Vanny? Vanay? I feel like I should do anyways. And
Black
she
girl magic.
basically, I know, right? She basically said anyone with a uterus can have a baby. And even if they don't identify as a woman, if they have a uterus, they can have a baby, which Jess did agree and said, yes, if you have a uterus, you can have a baby because you're a woman, basically is what she was saying. And so this met with some more pushback from like Laverne Cox and a whole community of saying that she's probably that she was being transphobic in her comment, in her statement. And Jess was standing 10 toes down on this that, yes, you're still a woman if you got a uterus, regardless of what you identify. And so this actually triggered an entire conversation about when does it become about womanhood versus being transphobic. Can you affirm and uplift womanhood without being transphobic? And how far have we gotten where we can just say that, yeah, they had a uterus, so therefore a man had a baby because they identify as a man? I guess that's the way it would be. Was that a trans man? Trans? Or is that, yeah, no, that's a trans man. But anyways, moving on. The whole question I'm asking you guys, because I realized I just befuddled it a little bit, is that what do you think about Jess Hilarious statement about women can have babies because they have a uterus, and that being her superpower, that because she can have a baby, and also the pushback from the LGBTQ community pertaining to her statement.
Man, that's a hot button issue right there. Here's why I think it's so hard to really discuss and really come to some sort of consensus. I think our language, our terminology has been so conflated at this point. I mean, we went from having men and women to then having trans men and then having trans women, then having trans women say, I'm woman just like the regular women. So now the regular women, birth women, need to call themselves cis women because we're all women. And I think what Jess was trying to do was to redraw these lines of distinction and say, okay, I am, she was defining her womanhood by her ability to bring forth kids or her biological structure being so that she could birth children, having a uterus instead of, let's say, testes and whatever. And the pushback to that was, if I remember correctly, it was like, no, no, anybody with a uterus can have a baby, even if it's a male. And I think the person was saying that to suggest that if someone was trans male, then they are still have a uterus, and that defeats Jess's superpower. But I think the conversation she was trying to have was she was trying to make a distinction that says, in order for her identity of womanhood to really resonate with her, she draws strength from the fact that she both has a uterus and presents as a female, and she's saying that makes her a woman. Okay. And that's, it's hard to tell people what they're not, right? It's hard to tell people how that they aren't however they feel, or that they don't feel whatever they feel. The problem then comes is, how do we determine who has the ownership right over these terms? And as these terms are redefined, we try to redefine ourselves or find new words for ourselves or find ways to distinguish ourselves from terms that we used to associate with that may no longer clearly define us. I think that's where she was with that, right? So it's, for instance, I ran into a guy. This is going to sound like a digression, but I don't think it is. I ran into a guy, and he said that he missed the time when black people were called Negroes. And I was, I'm from Mississippi. I was like, I don't have good feelings about the word Negro and then how it was used and when it was used or whatever. And he said, listen, no, he says, when we were Negroes, we had our businesses, we had Black Wall Street, we had this, we had that. There was a different kind of culture when we were Negroes. And I was like, And then I thought about how black people are continuously renamed every so often, from blacks to African Americans to Negroes to whatever, whatever, whatever. And I thought about it in terms of how, as a person moves in that space, when people put you into some sort of larger group and say, you're monolithic in the sense, or you're one big group, then you do try to find ways then to distinguish yourself. For instance, and I'll say this in our land, I grew up as a Pentecostal, okay, apostolic Pentecostal, Holy Ghost, speaking in tongues, whatever, whatever. That's how I grew up. I don't think that a lot of Pentecostals or apostolics would like for me to go around saying I'm Pentecostal or apostolic. They would feel like they need a distinction between me and them because my views or how I express it may be so different that they don't feel we should be sharing the same term. I think that's where she was coming from. And I think until we have the conversation about what we're just going to call people, until women, cis women, I guess, are able to go back to just being called women and feeling like they can stand on that and that is something exclusive that they own, I think this culture clash that we're having will continue. I don't think she tried to hurt anybody. I think she was trying to just stand on her little square, carve out her space, and say why she felt she could still define herself in this way.
I gotta tell you, I am so glad you went first, because you took such a great academic, thoughtful approach to the conversation. Like you did. So it's like, yay.
Thanks.
because like I get to be dumb on this one, right? First of all, I want to say that a womb is a superpower. Y'all should already know how I feel about the fact that, I mean, come on, man, we would not be here without them. I mean, I don't understand how we downplay the blessing, the just everything that is. It begins and ends with that for me, and just in terms of like just the miracle of life, the role that women play in that. I mean, it's not a superficial thing. You know what I mean? Like this is something that I don't know, man. Like you're born, your body evolves, you have things happen, you have a window of time, and then it's just like just the grand design of it all. I'm not trying to get religious or anything like that, but to me, it is a miracle. And I think we just take that for granted. Like it's just something like you could just put on. But so to me, when I saw it, I didn't even understand the context. I was like, oh shit, she pregnant again? That's what I thought initially when I first saw it. I was like, damn, girl, weren't you just pregnant? I mean, superpower or. But anyways, so for me, I agree with that. It is a superpower. It is a blessing. But as far as a larger conversation, it's far simpler than that to me, right? I am woman, hear me roar. You know what I'm saying? Like, listen, if you've been a woman for all your life, right? And that's all you've known, you know, that this is woman. This is what a woman is, right? And I get that things evolve over time. And then a group comes along and says, hey, I want to co-op. I want to be a part of this thing too, right? So you got to figure out how to make it make sense. So I get that, right? So you have one group that's happy with how things are. Hey, I women hear me roar. And you have another group who wants to change things because they want to exist. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? In principle, but what happens is there becomes infringements that happen in this kind of like pluralistic world that we live in. So the woman is just going about her business like, hey, I'm a woman just doing my thing, right? She's not hurting nobody. There's no intent there, right? But then the other person who's like, hey, cis woman, and the other woman's like, well, why are you calling me that? You know what I'm saying? And that woman is like, what the fuck is that? And immediately she feels some type of way. I understand why she'd feel some type of way. Like, why does her worldview have to change? Even though she didn't, right? I do get that we have to figure out how we make space for each other. And so maybe that's where the crux of the conversation is, right? Because the irony for me in all this is that people who want tolerance seem to not want to give it sometimes. Like when I hear people have this conversation for real, I hear women say, hey man, I'm a woman. I respect, hey, you want to do your thing, but you ain't this. Right? There's things I have to go through. There's a way that my worldview says that biologically, whatever justifications, right, that this is my position and I'm not going to come up off it just to make you comfortable, right? Because I do think there's a point where you have to stop asking somebody to discomfort themselves for someone else's comfort. I think that's a real conversation that we got to be able to have for real, right? Because if I feel like my wife is a woman and I may not identify that a man or a person who was formerly a male or whatever, I can choose to not acknowledge that. But in what practical way does that affect my life for real? Right? So most of the time, if I'm being honest, I just am polite. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't really cost me much to pretend live in their world if it somehow provides them some value without taking much from mine. But I'm a man who's saying this, right? Most of the time, we're not really concerned about trans men for real, because there really is no danger to us, unlike how I can see it being different for women.